Hooray. I'm so sorry, Joe. We will get this all smoothed out.
Awesome.
Thank you. So patient. Oh my goodness.
That works.
Yes. I can see you, which is wonderful. Representative Blackwater-Nigren, are you having any luck? Apparently we have to make that. Hi, there you are.
Hello.
We have to change that setting prior to starting the webinar, apparently, and there's no workaround. I'm frantically texting people. All right, I think we're back. I am recording. It looks like people are joining us again. I'm going to also make sure to get this up on YouTube Live as Joe is starting introductions, and then we'll get it up on Facebook Live for people that are looking for it. So we should be good. Thank you so much for joining us and for your patience.
So just to clarify, this is going to be on YouTube and Facebook Live?
Yes.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, Joe, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. So welcome, Representative Blackwater-Nigren. Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time out this evening. Beth as well. Thank you so much for really putting this together and earlier being the digital guru behind this as well tonight. So thank you. Welcome everyone viewing, everyone that's going to watch tonight in the future. Again, my name is Joseph Baya. We're having a little legislative update from our state representatives, and we're in Legislative District 7, and I apologize for my phone right there. And again, I'm up here in Kayenta, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. Let me just give you guys my clans, but that Dinishla, Twilajini Bashashin, Nakeda Dashache, Klash, Additionella. And I'm here in beautiful, sunny Kayenta, Arizona. So let me go ahead and hand it over to our moderator, Beth.
Hi all, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties. I am one of the co-founders of Save Our Schools Arizona, and also a parent and teacher in the Tempe area. And if you don't know a lot about Save Our Schools Arizona, we were formed about 5 years ago. We advocate for public schools, strong public schools that are well-resourced and well-funded so that all of our children have amazing opportunities for success in their childhood and in their teen years, and then for the rest of their lives. So I'm a passionate defender of public education, and just really happy to be here to listen to Representative Blackwater-Nigren and learn more, and also Joe Baya, and learn more about what's happening in LD7 and on the Navajo Nation. Joe, did you want me?
Let me go ahead and hand, yeah, let's go and have Representative Blackwater introduce herself. I just want to also mention that, in my community, I also serve on our public school board. I also am one of the community leaders, and I grew up in Kayenta, Arizona, graduated back in 2000, went through the public school system. And, we come from, a rare rural community that has a predominantly indigenous community, Navajo, and it's really great to be back serving our people. So Representative Blackwater.
Thank you for that, and good evening for all of those who are listening. Ado yat a she hashklishni nisha ado ashiha bashischin no da adana etkachini tashiche ado but atnidashanale. So my name is Jasmine Blackwater-Nigren, and I'm a state representative representing Legislative District 7. Legislative District 7 is the biggest legislative district, not just in Arizona, but also in the country. And Legislative District 7 is very unique in that we represent, myself and my seatmates, Representative Sosi and Senator Hatkafi, represent 8 different tribal communities within LD7, the biggest being Navajo, but we also represent Hopi, Wallapai, Havasupai, Southern Kaibab Paiute, and Southern Paiute, as well as Zuni Pueblo, White Mountain Apache, and San Carlos Apache. And so those are the different tribal nations that we represent. We also represent small and different rural communities in between those tribal nations. For example, a lot of Southern Apache County is not tribal nations, like Springerville, Vernon, St. John's, those areas as well. Up north, City of Page is also in our district. So very diverse district that we represent. I also am from the Navajo Nation, like Mr. Baya. I am from Red Mesa, Arizona, which is in the very northeastern corner of the state. I live about 2 miles south of the Utah border, very close to the Four Corners area. And I too went to high school, like Joe Baya here, in Monument Valley or Kayenta, Arizona. So go Mustangs. And I graduated back in 2013. Since then, I went to undergrad at Stanford University and then received my Juris Doctorate from ASU and currently a licensed and practicing attorney outside of my work at the legislature. So it's good to be here and excited to talk about education and all of the things that are happening down at the legislature.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before we move forward, Beth, I would like us all to kind of maybe highlight or recognize that this week is Teacher Educator Appreciation Week. And I hope you all can hear me okay. I picked, of all times, the wrong headphone where one side's not working and every now and then it works. So I hope you guys can hear me. So one of the teachers that, and earlier we were talking about how there's so many teachers that, I want to recognize, but I know that there's one that I had a lot of difficulty in math. I really struggled and I absolutely hated the subject. But there was a group of teachers that I remember growing up that made some very transformative progress with me. And one of them that I can think of, her name was Miss Vines. And I reached out to her son and I said, what grade was that? And we think it was right around 9th or 10th grade. So it's one of those early high school years where really you're starting to go into some of those more complex core math subjects, and it made a big difference. And it wasn't just that teacher, there were other teachers, but I want to recognize a particular math teacher, Ms. Vines, who through the magic of teaching, and working with kids, whatever their struggles and interests maybe in our public education, it's so difficult to, with the resources you have, to find the time and take learning, teaching to help individual students, but it can be done. And I want to highlight this teacher. She made a big difference, in my years. And turns out, as I went to college and higher math, math became one of my strong suits. So just want to highlight that. So Beth, tell us about one, and then you hand it back off to our representative and see what we all have to share and highlight.
It's hard to pick. I've had so many amazing educators. I was thinking about my high school physics teacher, Mr. Jennings. He was, I went to a school in Kingman, Arizona, so up north. And I had him for AP physics and regular physics the year before. And that's why I stuck with it. And he just made learning really, really fun in a time when, we were really under-resourced. It was a very poor school, and it was very hands-on, and he prepared me really well for my university career in science. And I just remember every single word problem, which in physics, there are a lot of word problems. Every character was from a Beatles song. And he taught us, one day he came in and he took a piece of paper and he rolled it into like a triangular cone and put it on a record player, and it played the music just with a piece of paper. And I just remember like my mind being blown. And it was just sort of like that every day, just something that was like very normal being made magical. So through the joys of science.
Well, I guess it's my turn now. And like you said, it's hard to choose just one teacher, because I feel like all of the teachers that I've had, they groomed me, they've molded me in some type of way. They've all had a very, very significant part in my life. And, I think back to all the different years, right, of education. I started off education in Red Mesa, and then we moved to Kienta. So I had all different kinds of teachers. And obviously, when I hit high school, there was a lot of teachers who contributed to me being like valedictorian, to being a Gates Millennium Scholar, and all of these like achievements, right? Like high school achievements that I had. And there's so many teachers who contributed to that, and it's so hard to just narrow down the one. Um, and so when I was thinking about this, I obviously, like, a lot of people came to mind, but I think the one that I really want to highlight is my third grade teacher, and her name was Mrs. Whitehair. And I don't know what she's doing now. I don't even know her first name, but I know she was older when she was my teacher. And I had just moved from Red Mesa to Kayenta. And so I was only doing like half a semester in Kayenta, and she was my new teacher. And I remember when I was in Red Mesa, I was always an overachiever. Like I was always like the star student and getting those types of certificates and awards by teachers and things. And when I moved to Kayenta, the curriculum was so different. Even though they're both like reservation schools, the curriculum was like at a different level in Kayenta. So like I think the pace that we were going, the things that we were learning, it was more advanced than what I was learning in Red Mesa. And I feel like this one teacher, she really motivated me to want to do more. And I think that's so special, because a lot of times when kids feel like something's too hard, they'll pull back or they'll shy away from it when something's too hard. But I don't know what it was, but she really just encouraged me. She motivated me to keep on it. And I think it was like, that's the foundational years, right, of education, and like it sets you on your path kind of. And she groomed me to be like this little study nerd who would go home and study math and reading and all kinds of things. And I really owe so much to her. And I wanted to highlight her while we're here talking today, even though like again, there's so many other teachers I could talk about, but I wanted to touch on her. Hopefully she's doing well. This was probably over 20 years ago now, but wishing her all the best. And I don't know if she's still teaching, but want to highlight her for Teacher Appreciation Week. And also wanted to give a shout out to all teachers up on Navajo, because being a teacher up on Navajo, I mean, we talk about the struggles of Arizona teachers, but I just want to do a quick shout out to our teachers up on the res. A lot of them are Navajo, but it's hard for them to, for example, when you're living on the reservation, it's hard to find housing. And I know it's like that in a lot of other communities across Arizona, but specifically on Navajo, because there's no like apartment complexes, there's no places for teachers to live on the res other than, unless you're from that community or the school provides housing. And it's such a unique, I think, problem for Navajo. And so I just want to give a shout out to all the teachers who live up there, and then like the non-Navajo teachers who live there, who have decided to live in this very rural, very poor part of our state just to help our Navajo students. I just wanted to give a special shout out to Navajo teachers who work up on Navajo and who are really giving themselves to our young Navajo students. So thank you.
Representative, thank you so much for those comments. It really is, stories need to be shared like this, where you do have many students in the state represented in urban communities, and then you have the rural communities. And I'm coming from the Navajo reservation, and I do hear a lot of teachers that move back and forth to some of their communities. They might be lucky enough to be able to drive back to their home community on the weekends, but still, a lot of the teachers that we're trying to hire, recruit, and fill key positions throughout the school district, a lot of times it is a difficult challenge. And being on the school board, I do see that we have so many positions open, and we're trying to fill them, and we're trying to be competitive in a state where we'll talk about some funding here in a minute, and then Beth, I'll hand it off to you to kind of get that started. But really, thank you, teachers. Thank you, teachers at my district all across the reservation. It is a beautiful but very sometimes harsh and expensive, place to live in rural Arizona. So Beth, let's go ahead and move into the next section.
Sure. I also, Senator Hatothly from LD7 was unable to make it tonight. She was planning on it, but had a family, a little bit of an emergency. So she sent us a video that we could play for Teacher Appreciation Week. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Fingers crossed. Can you see it?
Looks like it's going.
Yeah, it's a good afternoon. Hello to everyone out there. My name is Teresa Hatothly. I represent Legislative District 7. Welcome today, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time to acknowledge and send appreciation to our teachers out there in the great state of Arizona. So on May 3rd, President Biden designated National Teacher Appreciation Day. And from May 1st through May 7th was also designated as National Teacher Appreciation Week. So teachers, through their dedicated efforts, ensure our children learn the knowledge and skills needed to be successful in college, careers, and life. Arizona teachers are vital in the building of the future. Much of the progress and success Arizona has accomplished can be attributed to the quality and dedicated teachers entrusted with the educational development of our children to help them reach their full potential. And each of us can remember fondly that extraordinary teacher who made us feel heard and seen through their dedication and commitment. Today, we have a strong and effective system of free public education for all children and youth. It is essential to our democratic process and government. There are thousands of enthusiastic educators working in Arizona schools, putting in countless hours and extra effort to help students achieve, preparing them for their future education and workforce and their civic duties. We recognize and we acknowledge teachers throughout the great state of Arizona. And from my office as a state senator, I send recognition to all teachers. Since this week is Teacher Appreciation Week, we honor you for your hard work and then for your dedication for Arizona's future. Yeah.
I'm so glad that that worked out. We were able to watch it. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Beth.
So jumping right in, I want to save plenty of time for the panel. I know, Joe, you had sort of wanted me to discuss our priorities at Safer Schools Arizona. So I know that Representative Blackwater Nygren and the members of her caucus are working very hard on achieving these goals and priorities. We would really like to lift Arizona schools across the state out of last place in per student funding. For many folks don't know that we remain last in the nation in per student spending. And the needle on teacher pay has moved very little. So we have many teachers leaving the profession, moving to other states where they can receive not only much higher salaries, but better working conditions as well. And unfortunately, I think you're going to be seeing a lot of news stories coming out in the next couple of weeks and months about the mass exodus from the Arizona classroom, and that will be on the Navajo Nation as well. Things have been very, very tough on educators for the last 2 years, having to pivot to online learning and back to the classroom, and being asked to change the way that we do things, and frankly to have lack of support, anywhere from Facebook groups attacking teachers all the way up to our very governor attacking teachers. And it's been really, I know that people might think, oh, well, you can just ignore those things. But, I think that we all feel as though our profession is under attack. And so I do really encourage you all to reach out, not only to lawmakers to demand more funding, but also to local teachers, and to thank them for the work that they're doing, and to let them know that they are still respected members of the community and that they have your support. So at Save Our Schools Arizona, we also fight privatization. And by that, I mean sending more and more money to for-profit and education institutions. And so in Arizona, we are one of the top states for sending money to education institutions, schools that don't always have the kids' best interests at heart and are not transparent with taxpayer funds. So we have one of the biggest voucher programs in the entire country. And so we're looking to cap that program and make sure that it doesn't keep growing at an exponential rate. I know maybe Representative Blackwater-Nygren can touch on this, but lawmakers right now are sort of in a duel down at the Capitol saying that, yeah, we'll fund our schools if you let us expand these vouchers. And, Arizona voters already rejected voucher expansion only 4 years ago, resoundingly rejected that. So we are looking to fund the systems that 95% of families choose to improve student outcomes and to make sure that educators have working environments where they will stay, where we can attract and retain the best teachers for our kids. And, we have a long way to go, but I think that we have enough folks in the fight and amazing lawmakers who are really interested in doing the right thing for kids. And, Joe will talk about it at the end. We're trying to elect a few more people and change the balance of power, so we have a legislature that can actually work for kids and not get involved in these silly fights. And then the other point I know Joe wanted me to make is that we have a state budget surplus of $5.3 billion right now. So if you hear the governor say, I really wish we could fund schools, but the money's just not there, that's not correct. We have a lot of funding. We are sitting on a mountain of cash, and Arizona students are worth it, and they deserve to see that funding. And quite frankly, it's not just classrooms, it's also working families. Our families are struggling. My students, many of them have been evicted. Some of them have been made homeless for periods throughout the last 2 years. There's a lot of food insecurity. Arizona families' needs are not being met. And it is the job of the state government to fund those programs so that that's not happening. And like I said, we have a long way to go. So I'll turn it over to Joe so that we can get some questions in.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Beth. And I just want to say that with what you mentioned, I'm in my first term as a school board member, an elected school board member for my community. And I didn't come from the educational field, so I'm one of the board members that often has, a lot of questions in our meetings. And some of the confusion that I've had was, we have this great public school system on our great Navajo Nation, and the number of people, shared with me, what, a lot of the issues that are off the reservation don't necessarily affect the people here on the reservation. So when I did a little bit of digging and research, and I even went down to the Capitol, and I was able to testify on some bills, I heard firsthand that that's not necessarily true, even though some people might try and say that if you're on the reservation, you're shielded and protected from anything that's going on across the state. No, that's not true. A lot of things that happen off the reservation throughout the state, the money that the state's using is being spread, among all the schools. And, we have public schools on the Navajo Nation. They're going to be directly impacted by what's happening off the reservation. And it just turns out that a lot of people, like on the reservation, we might feel like we have a little shielding by design where we don't hear a lot of that information that does come through. So it's important that organizations like Sabre share information with their communities. Sometimes it's difficult to do because not everyone might, be as comfortable sharing it on social media or have the know-how to do that. So, and especially I wanted to be able to have a great background on tonight's discussion with the great toes or the Navajo Nation monuments in the background, but the 5G just won't carry the video that well, Beth. So I had to come home and throw on my Zoom wallpaper and talk to you guys tonight. And so with that said, I kind of want to share with the viewers some of the things that I wonder about when I have, a state elected leader on a discussion tonight. And I'd like to know a little bit about some of the various bills, laws that are being handled down at our state capitol that maybe have to do with education tonight. So Representative Blackwater Nygren, give us a little bit on some of those bills and maybe something that you're proud of or would like to highlight and share. Thank you.
Sure. So I guess for those listening who might be listening now or who might be listening later, I think some background is good for context for some of this stuff. So Arizona is a very right, well, at least at the legislature, right? We're controlled by a majority Republican Party in both the House and in the Senate. And also we have a Republican governor. So there's kind of this whole right wing of conservatives that basically legislate for the state of Arizona. And in the House, we have 31 Republicans and 29 Democrats. And in the Senate, we have 16 Republicans and 14 Democrats, which means they need every single one of their members, Republican members, to pass a bill that might be controversial that Democrats might want to vote against. With that being said, it's very difficult to have our Democratic priorities passed because of the numbers in the House, the Senate, and also our governor. And so what we see instead happening, instead of a bipartisanship that happens, for example, we could have moderates of both parties come together and push legislation. What instead we see at the legislature is that instead of trying to work in a bipartisan way, what we're seeing more and more often is that the Republican Party only wants Republican priorities. And that comes at the cost of listening to their very, very conservative right-wing members, even though maybe not all of the Republicans might not agree with a certain agenda. That's just kind of how things play out. So it's very partisan. I guess that's what I wanted to start off by saying. And also it feels like we're starting to see more and more of these very, very conservative bills come to the floor. And it's kind of scary, right? And so if you watch any state news or national news about what's going on in the US, it's the same thing. There's partisanship issues that happen all across the country. And you hear it all the time. It's Arizona, Florida, Texas, Georgia, the Dakotas. Like we are at that same level of Republican majority houses and senates. And so with that being said, let's talk about education. It's all related, I promise. What we're seeing again is this trend to pass very conservative education related bills. And there's like a whole slew of them, right? But I just mostly wanted to touch on 2 or 3 that I think will be telling to show, this is kind of how things happen at the legislature. And then also just real quickly, I am not on our education committee in the House. So I sit on the transportation as well as the land, agriculture, and rural affairs committees. So education isn't really what I see on a weekly basis in committee. I know that our Senator Hutkofi, she sits on the education committee in the Senate. So I was hoping to lean on her a little bit, but I'll do what I can do. And so I guess when making this list, the first thing that came into my mind was this bill, and I don't have the bill number in front of me, but it was a bill sponsored by Representative Kaiser. And Beth, you probably know these bills more than I do, but I can share what I know because it was a really hot topic debate that happened when it came forward. And so this bill sponsored by Representative Kaiser, a Republican member of the House, would mandate that teachers post everything, post their, I don't come from an education background either. So like I'm trying to find the words, their lesson plans, any materials that they might use, books, hand work. It's been a while since I've been in public school education too, but anyway, all of the materials that they would use in a lesson plan, they would have to post that on a website. I think it was 2 weeks before that material is presented to their children. And that parents would have the opportunity to basically object to anything that they think would be controversial. And on the Republican side of it, the argument is that this will allow will allow parents to be better, to have more control in the classroom, to be aware of what their children are learning, et cetera, et cetera. They want more parental control in our schools. But from the teachers' standpoint, their perspective is that this is way too much overreach by parents, that teachers have been teaching for decades, that we know what they're teaching, and that there are not enough resources out there for teachers to be doing this on a weekly, bi-weekly, daily basis. It is going to completely overwhelm the time that they should be doing, the time that they should spend teaching instead of uploading these kinds of materials. And so that was the bill that we heard about 2 weeks ago. And fortunately, it did not pass, which was very surprising. We had one Republican member, Representative Joel John, who voted against it. And it was kind of a big deal because, like I said, when they want to pass a bill, they have to have every single one of their members on it. And in this case, the Democratic Party was opposed. And we had one of their members opposed, and it hurt. I guess you could see the hurt on the other side of the aisle. And yes, they are still twisting his arm. And I understand that they are planning on putting it up for reconsideration. So that's just one example of the kinds of bills that we're hearing as they relate to education. There's this huge argument on the Republican side for more parental control inside our classrooms, more micromanaging of our teachers. And I don't think we see this as much up on Navajo, but I know it's prevalent here in Maricopa County where teachers are parents are like attending public school board meetings and things, and like protesting and doing all sorts of things at school board meetings, and arguing for more parental control in the classroom. And I don't think that's really the case up on Navajo. And Joe, you probably have more insight into this than I do, but there's that disconnect. Like you were talking about earlier, there's this big disconnect between what's happening here in Maricopa County in our more conservative legislative districts and what's happening up on Navajo, because on Navajo, like that's not even an issue. We don't have that issue with parents trying to insert themselves into classrooms and insert themselves into lesson plans. That's just not one of the issues that we have. And we also don't see that huge like right-wing conservative arm up on Navajo either. So it's really interesting for me to hear about these bills and then to learn about how they've been introduced by parent groups and these other organizations who try to insert themselves into the legislature, because up on Navajo, where I'm from, that just doesn't exist. So that's one bill. And then the other bill, I guess well, it's not a bill, but the other bill that had a lot of attention was basically this idea of defunding public schools that have D or F grades. And that was that bill caused a lot of it was, a lot of controversy. I don't think it ever moved, or it's no longer moving in the process, but that's also another bill that was out there, again, being pushed by the conservative side of the Republican Party. This idea that our schools have to perform to receive funding, which we know up on Navajo, that would defund a lot of, probably a majority of our public schools up on Navajo, because we know that our schools aren't, a lot of them are D and F schools, unfortunately, and that's just the reality. And so we see these very conservative tactics being used to attack our public school education at the legislature. And like Joe, you said, there's a disconnect on Navajo. We don't think things that are happening at the legislature affect Navajo, but they do. And then one of the biggest ways they do affect Navajo is our public schools. I mean, obviously Navajo, we have BIA schools, we have grant schools, we have charters. We have Navajo schools. So I would say maybe like 70% of our students attend public schools. And then maybe 30% of our other Navajo students attend like BIE and these other grant type schools, but majority of our students attend public schools, and the decisions that, state legislatures are making directly impact schools, teachers, funding back home. And so I wanted to also mention that. And those are kind of the two bills that I wanted to touch on really quickly. I know there's a whole bunch of others that I was hoping our senator would be here to touch on, because she's in the thick of it in her education committee. And I don't see the super bad bills unless they come onto the floor, and they have to be pretty far into the process to come to a floor vote. So those are the only ones that I'm aware of that we've really had a whole lot of conversation about. And then on a weekly basis, there's different bills going through committee, but I don't sit on the education committee, so I'm not really aware of other bills that have come through the Senate or House education committees.
No, I think you did a phenomenal job summarizing these, pretty ridiculous ideas that are coming through, particularly when we have so many very real needs, right, that our kids are facing. It's a lot of special interests, right? I don't know if you see that, but groups like the Goldwater Institute and Betsy DeVos's group are always coming in with all of these ideas. They're really good at selling things, right? Like it's all about parental rights and transparency. But the reality is, at least in other states, when these bills are passed, it leads to like tip lines where people report teachers and like endless strings of lawsuits. And, I talked earlier about the climate where teachers are already feeling, a general lack of support and like sort of fear that we're going to be attacked at any time. So you can imagine if a bill like that were to pass, oh my goodness. I think Joe had wanted me to ask you a little bit about the budget. And I know that you said that we're at a standstill, but just for folks that joined a little later, could you sort of explain where are budget negotiations? Why are they the way they are? And what do you think will happen if you have any predictions?
So disclaimer, again, as a member of the minority party, we are left out of almost all budget negotiations, conversations. Again, they need all of their members on a budget bill or any part of the budget. They need all of their members on, unless they decide in what is probably not going to happen, in that this idea that there's going to be a bipartisan budget and that they're going to get Democrats on. And in my opinion, the only way that they're going to have Democrats on is if they fund Democratic priorities. And I can tell you that I have not been approached to vote for a budget, bipartisan or not. And I will admit that last year I was approached several times to vote for a budget. And I didn't do that. But at this point last year, I had been approached several times to vote for a budget, and I have not been asked this year. So I can say that they probably aren't looking for Democratic votes, at least at this point in time. And I think what they're doing right now is they're getting all of their members in line for a budget. And like I said, they need all of their members, and it's pretty wild. So like 2 weeks ago, they attempted to pass a budget. They passed what we called a skinny budget, and it was basically a continuation of services that are needed to basically avoid a government shutdown if we don't pass a budget. And I guess you call it skinny budget, a baseline budget, a continuation budget. And that was attempted 2 weeks ago in the House. It was introduced by the appropriations chairwoman in the House, and they went through the appropriations committee and it failed. All of the Democrats voted against it because, Beth, as you said earlier, we have a $5.2 billion surplus in the state of Arizona. And why aren't we funding our public schools? Why aren't we funding our Democratic priorities? And that was why all of the Democrats voted against the bill. And I guess this will kind of give you a sense of what happens when a budget comes forward. They also had 2 Republicans vote against the budget. They had Representative Hoffman, who's a very, very conservative Republican. And his reasoning when it came down to a vote, his reasoning for voting against the budget was that this budget, has too much spending in it. Even though it was a baseline budget, in his opinion, everything needed to be cut even more. And then we also had Representative Udall vote against the budget. And in her opinion, we weren't spending enough in the budget. And those are 2 Republicans on different ends of the spectrum of the Republican side of the aisle. And so they need to basically figure out how to satisfy Republicans on both ends of that spectrum. And it's hard, right? And last year they couldn't do this. Last year it took them until June 29th to figure out how to negotiate and how to get all of their members on something. And just so you know, the last day that we have to pass a budget is June 30th. And that's kind of our cutoff date. And so we'll see what happens. A lot of people at the House and in the Senate are running for other seats. Everybody's up for re-election, either for their current seats. Some people are going over to the Senate. Some Senate members are coming to the House. A lot of other members are running for statewide seats, for congressional seats. And so the other thing is everyone wants to go out and campaign. And so everybody wants to be done with session, but at the same time, they're stuck in this limbo. And so I don't know what's going to happen. There's whispers of a bipartisan budget, but again, I haven't been asked. I don't know if I'll be asked, but at this point, who knows? And if they want a true bipartisan budget, then they're going to have to seriously consider funding education, funding our Democratic priorities. And last year, they said that they were funding some of our priorities, but it wasn't enough. And no Democrats voted for that budget last year either. So that's where the budget is. My guess is that maybe in 2 weeks they might introduce something, but I'm hearing that they don't have their members on. Again, it's the 2 extremes in their caucus, that some of them want certain projects funded and others don't. So we'll see. We'll just wait and see what happens. And then I know, Beth, you wanted me to touch a little bit on this idea that a Republican member in the Senate is kind of has introduced, and that's Senator Paul Boyer. I don't know if it's out there, right? It's in the papers, it's everywhere that he's said this. I haven't heard him say it, but I know that he said it. Is that he wants more money for K-12 education. And it's like in the hundreds of millions of dollars for public school education. So his idea is that we do that for public school education. At the same time, we want universal or almost universal voucher expansion. And, those are 2 things that it's really interesting. And we know that other members of the Republican Party don't want to fund K-12 education. They don't want to spend more money. And so I don't know what's going to happen with that. But that is the proposition. And I understand that he is holding out until he gets that. And they can do this, right? Like I said, mentioned earlier, they need every single one of their members on a budget to pass it. Unless they pursue this idea of a bipartisan budget. But that, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. And so individual members of the Republican Party can hold out for different things. Last year, we saw this in several places. We saw that Representative Cook held out his vote until he got funding for wildfire aid and other things like that. So, you know, it's common, people hold out. So we'll just wait and see what happens with that. I think that answers your question.
Yes, and we had a great question in the Q&A. What do Republicans want to spend the surplus on? Or do they want to spend it at all?
In my opinion, it sounds like, well, it's what kinds of Republicans again. You have Republicans who do want to spend it, on K-12 education. And then you have some Republicans who don't want to spend it at all, period. And although some Republicans, you know, they want to see more budget cuts. We saw that happen last year. We saw budget cuts happen for the wealthy that would benefit mostly the wealthy, even though we had a surplus last year. And so I hope that answers your question. It doesn't, I guess the Republican Party isn't this like one size fits all type of answer. These different factions sort of, and they're all kind of dueling it out right now. And we'll continue to see that happen until they can put together a budget.
Thank you so much for your insight there. I know there's a lot going on, and it really helps all of us to have a little like peek inside behind the curtain. Joe, I think you were going to talk a little bit about what you're up to, and then I think you had a final question for Representative Blackwater-Nygren.
Absolutely. So being up here in Kayenta, today I was out at the flea market. So we got markets where I'm able to give out information, have people sign up for weekly newsletters, and there are a lot of other organizations that are doing a lot of great things, even helping with voter advocacy. So I want to make sure that I am getting out in the community, I'm sharing information, and I'm also with what I'm learning in our board meetings at the school district, learning about how we can advocate for preventing things like the aggregate expenditure limit, not impacting, our school districts up here on the reservation, when a lot of people didn't know what that was. And I think that means, I have a lot of work to do to try and get more people, in the know-how of what's going on off the reservation, what impacts us. And again, 95% of the majority of families, are in the public school system. And I'm in a region of rural Arizona that does not have private schools nearby, and a lot of the people in our community, they're not making as much throughout the rest of the national averages. So we want to make sure that we keep as much funding supporting our school, and we want to make sure that we have a strong future. And it does come down to making sure we invest in our public schools. So with that said, I want to ask Representative Blackwater-Nygren, what can pro-public education advocates do to help in LD7?
Well, thank you so much for that question. It's a pretty tough question to answer because, again, there's such a disconnect between what happens in LD7 and specifically what happens on Navajo or other tribal nations. But I think the biggest thing that we can do as concerned citizens is to really educate yourself about these issues and educate yourself on what the aggregate expenditure limit is, educate yourself on what are school vouchers and how do they affect public school funding, and what is that going to mean for Navajo kids. And I think that what I learned at least last legislative session was that I was asked to vote in favor of about expanding vouchers. And I was asked to do this by Navajo elected leaders, specifically Navajo council delegates. And I don't know, I mean, I explained to them the best that I could. I had our staff explain to them what vouchers were, but they still came on very strong-handed, putting a lot of pressure on me to vote for voucher expansion in exchange for other things. I won't get into the other things, but it was very concerning to me that they didn't understand what vouchers were and that they thought it was an okay thing to ask of me. And that they also thought that it wouldn't harm Navajo students or our public school systems. And to me, that was kind of frightening because they weren't aware of this and that they weren't aware of the organizing and different things that have been happening for years by organizations like Save Our Schools, which is very grassroots, and they are present up on Navajo. And, you know, Jobiah, you are an example of that. There is a presence on Navajo, but I'm still being asked to do crazy things by Navajo elected leaders. And so I would say that, and the other thing is that there's this idea that what happens at the legislature, like there's a secrecy to it, and that no one's going to find out I did this really bad thing, or that I was asked to do this bad thing, as in vote for school vouchers. And there's this idea that there's this that it's a whole separate, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just this idea that things that happen at the legislature but happen behind closed doors, when we need to be more transparent about what happens down there, and we need to show the voters that this is what happens and these are the efforts that are happening there. So I would just say that educate yourself on the different bills that have been coming through our legislature, educate yourselves on voucher expansion, what that means, what it is. And also don't be afraid to share and reach out to the Save Our Schools network. And I know, Joe, you're doing your best, and I'm excited to see the rest of the work that you do because we need it up on Navajo. And I'm so happy that I was asked to be here, and that, you know, we're doing our best to educate those up in LD7 about what these efforts are. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Representative Blackwater. And I know we just got just a couple of minutes, so I want to give us some time for closing remarks. Again, I'm going to be working on getting more information out to our people through weekly newsletters, through canvassing events, and working and learning a lot more from the great organizers and the great advocates throughout the state, and Beth's teams down in the urban areas. So a lot of my efforts have been really seeing what's being done in the bigger cities and assisting in meetings. So Beth, please, closing remarks. Thank you to everyone who has watched this evening. I'm Jobiah. I'm up in Kent, Arizona. I'm Navajo and one of the school board members in my community at Kent Unified School District.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Joe, for putting this together. Thank you so much, Representative Blackwater-Nigren, for participating, and to Senator Hatathli, who still sent a video even in a moment of emergency. I've just learned so much listening to you, and I hope we can do a lot more of these. Thank you to everybody that joined. And I know some folks were looking to see this on Facebook Live, so I'll make sure to get that up as soon as we're done here. And I am just so enthused by the amount of public understanding of what's going on, and really the groundswell of support for educators, for parents, for students. I think a lot of people thought that we were going to take some of the losses that we've had recently and just sort of, go hide under a rock for a little while. And instead, they're really realizing that public education advocates simply will not quit. And the reason is because we're not fighting for schools, we're not fighting for concrete boxes, we're fighting for kids, and we're fighting for their futures. And so we just simply don't know how to quit that work, and we never will. So I guess I'm saying that to the Supreme Court and the governor and majority lawmakers and everybody out there who is just sort of banking on us giving up and walking away. It is not going to happen. And we are committed to electing more people like Representative Blackwater-Nygren on November 8th. And if you'd like to get involved in that work, I'll make sure to put a link there, and Joe can get you connected. But we're going to be canvassing. If you are located around the state and not really in an area where you have any lawmakers that you're excited about, you can still phone bank with us every Thursday and still make a huge difference. So that's a statewide phone bank. So I'll leave you with that. And then I wanted to wish a very happy Mother's Day to Representative Blackwater-Nygren. I think, is this your first Mother's Day?
Yes.
That's
Yes.
so I'll let you have the final comments and we'll wrap up.
Oh, well, thank you again, Beth and Joe, for having me this evening. I know we had some technical difficulties early on, but I feel like it was very worthwhile. And we missed our senator for sure. Hopefully she can jump on the next one, and that you all continue to do the good work that you are doing. I know it isn't easy, and it's hard sometimes, because when you're in the minority, there's little that you can do as far as, getting your own priorities pushed. And I know how difficult that is and exhausting it is. And it sometimes, feels really helpless when there's something that this would benefit the kids in Arizona. This is for the better future of our state, for our kids, for our tribal nations, and universally, it'll just help so much if we could just fund public school education. Like, there is just, a laundry list of reasons why we need to, and it is so frustrating that we can't do that much at the legislature. And it's difficult. And so I applaud you, Beth and Joe, for doing the hard work, for educating others about this process, because it's hard work. And thank you so much for all of the work that you do, and for all of the teachers that you represent and that you speak on behalf of, because we know that teachers are overworked and that they're tired. And thank you so much for being their voice and for doing all of this and more, because session's not over, and we're going to see. Hopefully it doesn't get worse, but usually, from what the brief experience I had last year, it gets pretty bad at the end. And it feels like it's already been a pretty bad session. So I don't see how it's going to get worse, but I have a feeling it might. But I thank you all for the work that you do. And thank you for having me. And good evening, and have a good rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take care.
you.